Can you hit record on the cloud?
It is recording.
Is it recording?
Yes. Right then, good afternoon, everybody. It is after 12 o'clock, so it is officially the last half day in the week. So we're all hoping for a sunny weekend this weekend. Now, I noticed the vast majority of you are on there. Well done, Elaine. You've got your camera on. This is an open discussion, so do feel free to put your cameras on. It's always nice to see everybody. We don't control your mute. We don't kind of tell everybody to shut up or turn their cameras off. This is a joint discussion. I just happen to be here and facilitating that. And we've got Lindsay there as well. She's just turned her camera off. I know she's having fun and games with her internet. She's at home at the moment, and I'm sure I'm not allowed to say it's because she's getting married tomorrow, but there we go. I've said it now. It's all too late and out there in the open. So she's doing it from home. She's got the board behind her and she's going to be kind of taking copious notes as she does, but it's going to be me kind of leading the conversation today. Now, I am looking for somebody else who's meant to be joining us, and I don't think she's on yet, so she will also be joining us. We've got Katie, who's also going to be on the call, and Katie facilitated some of these discussions when we were at the conference. So, as ever, and speaking of the devil, there's Katie. She's just coming in now. Morning, Katie. Afternoon, Katie. I just got it right. Afternoon. She's just connecting. There's a few people connecting to audio. I have to say, this is, of all of the ones that we've done, this has probably had the greatest number of delegates, certainly the number of sign-ups that we've had for a long time. There you go, Lindsay's got a picture on. So, Katie. Katie's there. Katie did some of the conversation at the conferences, so hopefully she'll be able to add a bit more. She'll put her camera on in a minute when she's adjusted herself. Just a couple of things. Please, can you open your chat box and say hi in chat? We like to keep chat going through the session. We've got quite a few people on. As Jenna said, we've had 60 people sign up. Now, that normally means we'll end up between 30 and 40 on there. And obviously, 30 or 40 people can't speak all at once. We're going to provide you with a range of ways that you can interact during the session today. So chat is one of them. So it's worth getting your chat box open and getting involved in there. Oh, and we've got somebody here for our first time, Neil. Pleased to meet you. Glad to have you on board. Hopefully it will not be your last and you'll get something interesting out of this session today. So let me share my screen with you. We'll not do the schoolboys error, which I've done before, which is forgetting to share my screen. So hopefully you can all see my screen. Now, just for those of you who are not connoisseurs of Zoom, you do have the opportunity in your Zoom window to mess around in terms of how much you want to have sharing the screen and how much you have of seeing all of the other faces or just the person who's talking. So I usually like the Rubik's Cube at the top, and then I can see as many faces as people who've got the cameras on, and I can see the names of other people. And I've got another screen where I can actually see what's been displayed. So hopefully you can all see my screen now. Now, one of the things we will be encouraging as we kind of go through is people to interact and use some of the functionality within Zoom. Now, first things first, if you're using Zoom, all right, Neil, can other people hear me? I'm assuming so because nobody's. So Neil, sorry, Neil, can you hear me?
Oh, absolutely fine. Yeah, I can see you as well.
All right then. So, I was going to say another Neil said they couldn't actually kind of hear, but things all seem to be working now, which is good. One of the other things that we're going to be using is this being ability to use the annotate tool within Zoom. Now, just a quick word of warning: if you're using Zoom via your web browser, we know this doesn't work for you. Okay, so feel free to kind of stick to adding things into chat. But if you're using it on the app, then if you go into your menu, you should be able to see the annotate button. And if you click on text, you can choose what color you want but then you should be able to go into one of the boxes that I've got on screen and type. So you can pick your different ones. You can, as Lindsay's doing there, you can put some stamps and have some love hearts or some stars to support you. So just as a practice, just to kind of make sure, because as I say, this is going to be some of it. So there's a few people, absolutely, if you're on web browser, you can kind of stick it in chat. And again, Lindsay will be watching chat. And we'll be taking things from there. But as I say, if we do it on the screen, then everybody gets the opportunity to kind of type in and be involved in that. So we've had a few people who are starting to do that. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a minute. There we go. There's a few people who have not used it before. Once you get kind of quite smart, you can, if you can change it in the format button, you can change the color, the kind of the size of it. You can even change the font you use as well. So there's all kinds of games. If you ever decide to use this in Zoom, quick Zoom lesson while we're here, you have to remember that actually when you change screens, so if I kind of, if I change screens, you'll see that all of the annotation comes with me. So we do have to kind of, unless you kind of capture the screen, which is one of the reasons why we're recording, you actually kind of take it. So what I'm going to do now in Annotate is I'm just going to clear all of those drawings before we move on to the next slide. So there we go. We've got a few people who are still playing with that. Apologies, but I'm going to just delete your lovely comments. So just kind of keep that in mind, and we're going to use that as we go through the session today. Now, there's lots of sunny places, everybody. Oh, Wet and Wild in Leeds. That sounds like an old swimming pool I used to go to when I was in the northeast. It used to be called Wet and Wild. So today's session is one of 4 of our summer series, where when we were at the conferences, we had some boards that people could contribute to and write on. Now, you'll know that a lot of us have, you know, every time we kind of go out to these, we usually provide the opportunity to get some input and some conversation with people who attend. And typically we do post-it notes. This year we decided to go one step better and actually get a board printed so people could physically write on it. So those of you who can see Lindsay, she's gone off for a minute, on Lindsay when her camera's working, you can see she's still got that physical board behind her. So we had 4 boards, and then what we said is we would take each of those boards, bring them back to the wider House of Claymore audience, have a conversation around what's on those boards, and then after that kind of work out if people wanted to do anything with it, wanted us to produce any templates, help, guidance to support them in that. So we did hybrid delivery, which I have to say was a really interesting session that we did, and perhaps was a bit not what we'd anticipated. Today we're going to be doing benefits management, and we've got 2 more scheduled in the diary, one on resource management and one on low maturity, working in a low maturity organisation. These were topics that people had said that they wanted a bit more kind of conversation on. So Lindsay, in her way, had produced, this is what the empty board looked like. I've deliberately included it there so you can see kind of where we started off, about what's the real challenge, what didn't work, what the blockers were, dream outcomes, moonshot, what haven't you tried yet, and what have you tried that helped, and gave people the opportunity, both in the London conference and the Scottish conference, just to kind of annotate. And this is what we ended up with. Everybody see that as clear as mud? Of course you can. So what we're going to just do on the session today is we're just going to go through each of those different sections, just have a quick conversation. Again, anybody who's got a similar issue as was mentioned, perhaps articulate that a bit. People want to kind of share in a little bit more detail. And then what Lindsay's doing, she's physically writing it on the board. As you'll see, she's got her Sharpie pen out. She's also kind of taking copious notes. And when we get to the end, we'll have a conversation in terms of, well, what do we want to do with the output of this? Do you want us to take this a little bit further? Do you want us to provide some more help? Has this been sufficient to help people go to the next step? So all and everything was going to be covered. We're going to limit it to an hour, conscious it's Friday lunchtime, and most of us kind of are kind of at that stage where we've got things to I's to dot and T's to cross before the weekend. So we will limit it to an hour. We'll see how far the discussion gets. So first thing we're going to look at is, what is the real challenge? What is the problem that actually organizations are trying to actually solve? And I've typed them up because some of them were a little bit more difficult to read and a little bit more blurred. And I have to say, there is a quote which I really like, and I don't know who said it, but that says, "A problem well stated is a problem half solved." So actually trying to understand what the problem is that we're actually trying to overcome really kind of helps us look at what the solution might be and what are the main causes we might want to address. And what I find interesting in terms of kind of this, what the real challenges are. Well, actually, before I talk about what I find interesting, you'll see there's post-it notes down the right-hand side. So Elaine, fantastic, you put yours in chat in terms of adding to this. Anybody want to just kind of use the annotation tools? Feel free to add onto that right-hand side anything else where you think, what you think the real problem is. Just see if anybody's got anything else. So I noticed there's a couple of people who are writing through that. So Katie's there. I am going to call you out, Katie. I know you haven't got your camera on yet. When you were having the conversations with people at the conference, was there anything else that they were discussing? There we go, Katie. Hello, everybody. Say hello, Katie. She loves it when I call her out. Anything that they were discussing that wasn't necessarily written down? What was their general view of kind of what their problems were?
Thanks, Eileen, and afternoon, everyone. So I think the main questions were around what is actually benefits management, and from an ownership point of view, is who owns the process, what is what are the roles and responsibilities. I think those were the main questions or main inquiries about from the benefits kind of management point of view.
Yes, and I think we can see this, you know, in some of the things that were actually written on the board in terms of, well, who does that? And in a lot of organizations that I work in, we're still in a position where there's a confusion over the role of the project manager in terms of, you know, they're there to deliver the benefits of the project, not just deliver the outputs of the project. And where I find that's also really confusing is where organizations have people in business as usual who are appointed project managers, and essentially at the end of the project, they're handing the deliverable over to themselves in a business as usual role. So I might be sitting in HR, there's a project to develop a new process, and implement a new system. So I get, you know, kind of seconded onto the project. I work on the project. I may not necessarily even be the project manager, but then when I go back into my business as usual in an HR role, people still associate me with the project. They don't realize that I've taken my project hat off and I'm back in my business as usual role. So you know, people generally don't understand when does the project finish and business as usual start. And if you've got personnel who sit in the project and in business as usual, it just muddies the water even more. So interesting in terms, you know, if you look at all of the kind of the textbook, in the textbook, so Linda, you were asking if you can move your annotation. There is a mouse thing or a select button. Let me just see if I can do it for you. There we go. well, there is a select button, you can do that. There is this kind of confusion over kind of where it sits in textbook. It's absolutely clear. Sponsor owns it, project manager deliver the outputs, people in business as usual do the delivery, but nobody really knows what that means in practice. And where some of the other challenges are tends to be where, as an organization, the PMO looks after the life cycle between project initiation and project close. And so whenever we do our reporting from a PMO perspective, essentially as soon as the project's finished, it goes off our radar. And there's nobody else in the organization who does any type of reporting or chase up or catch up, or provides visibility of those projects that are in a position where they're in benefits realization stage in the project. So interesting in terms of, kind of thinking about or kind of how we help the organization, really understanding the whole benefits management piece and where that sits in terms of our project management life cycle. Now, I'm saying that because one is assuming, and we all know what assuming does. It's always interesting where organizations don't really have a true understanding of program management. So my assumption is a lot of these challenges are because we only do true project management and don't have that extended life cycle or have a program management capability. But I'm happy if anybody's say, well, actually, we do program management. We still don't do benefits management. A couple of other things in there in terms of the role of the sponsor. Again, one of the things that we find, it is probably the least well-defined, understood, and executed role around projects. In terms of kind of who picks up that role, and a lot of that stems from misunderstanding. Organizations tend to appoint sponsors, and I've been in an organization where they've said quite categorically, when we've explored the role of the sponsor with a senior leadership team, their comment was, well, we write the check, what else do you expect us to do? Which was an interesting view. They didn't see that as any kind of proactive role through the life of the project. And certainly no role at the end of the project other than to chat to the project manager in terms of why the project hadn't worked. So I do think that's an interesting one. The other thing in there, which I think we found from a House of PMO perspective, for a long time, benefits management was on top of the too hard pile. And so never really got addressed. Sadly, that's been usurped now by resource management. So, there's lots of organisations have taken a stab at benefits management and is actually better understood perhaps than it's been. More organisations are trying it, and we're making some progress in involving it. So I think there's that kind of bigger picture in terms of kind of just understanding it in relation to project management, understanding, as Katie said, in terms of who the roles, and that role of the sponsor also, I think, kind of goes back to some of the other challenges here in terms of what's the role of portfolio management in the organisation, because a lot of portfolio is around looking at are the projects delivering, rather than are the projects delivering the overall strategy by delivering the benefits. And again, I saw this in an organization where we were introducing project management as a thing into an organization, and the senior executive said, well, we want to meet with this project managers on a month-by-month basis. And I said, what for? And they said, well, we want to know that the project's progressing. I said, why on earth are you interested? What you should be interested in is meeting with the sponsors on a regular basis and say, you promised me if we did this investment, we would be delivering these benefits in the organisation. So I want confirmation from the sponsors that the benefits are still being delivered. And then, yes, we can provide some support to the sponsors to make sure the projects are on track. But actually, from a senior team, from a high-level portfolio management perspective, we should be focusing on the benefits rather than progress. And I think there's something kind of historic. If we've spent time introducing project management into an organization, we've got used to doing project reporting so people can see the RAG status of projects and whether they're being delivered or not, trying to change the focus from actually, are we delivering projects, to are we delivering benefits in the strategy, is quite a step change from the people who are involved at that kind of senior level. So there is a kind of an interesting bit in terms of kind of where that step change is, and recognizing that as a problem. So some of those things in terms of, you know, the things we've got there in terms of the wider leadership team who owns that, is an interesting one. Other things to kind of pick out in terms of some of the kind of underlying problems is the fact that PMO is still seen as an admin and governance function, not necessarily seen as a business partner to help organisations delivering this. And then I think the other thing that comes out of there, if we're starting to look at kind of what the kind of grouping some of these, is this whole kind of focus on, and again, some of it is terminology, is recognising that there's more to benefits than just finance. And there is a, you know, when we talk about benefits management, it's often proliferated in problems because people immediately think of a cost benefit analysis and a spreadsheet. And spreadsheet is great for manipulating numbers. It's less good for evaluating text and doing comparisons and trying to work out how does a, you know, kind of a qualitative benefit compare with a quantitative benefit. So this kind of tangible versus non-tangible focus on finance, interestingly, in terms of this, Lindsay's favourite word, value, how is that actually measured, is really important. So lots of kind of underlying problems that I think we're trying to address through benefits management. And I think, and it comes up in another pod, but I do actually just kind of want to mention it here because I do think it's very important. Going back to, it was interesting when we did the keynote speaker, and anybody who knows me knows I'm rubbish with names. Americo, there we go, I remembered his name. Americo Pinto did a talk and said, you know, the most effective PMOs are those that do what the organizations need and want them to do. And I do think if we look at this list, to me, it is very, very obvious it has been written by people who work in and around PMOs. And I wonder if we had written this in business terms, what would the senior leadership team, what would the kind of the senior managers in the business have written in terms of what are the problems they see in trying to get return on investment for the money that they spend on projects? So I think, you know, I absolutely the PMO and the House of PMO is for PMO people, but I certainly think when we're looking at something that is so closely linked to driving value for the organization, is about starting to think about, well, how would they have articulated it? What problem do senior managers see? And then kind of do the translating in terms of what does that mean for us in a project management, project delivery world in terms of how to solve that. So just a challenge, because I don't think there was anything in there that was actually written from a business perspective, which to me said something. So I'm passing on that observation to you. Anybody want to say anything? I know that we've had quite a bit in chat, and it's lovely to see the comments on the right hand side. Anybody want to add anything? Anybody want to come in and say something around what the underlying problem is?
Hi Eileen, it's Jess Richardson from Carnival UK here. I wrote the top box on the screen, so I think mine is somewhat from the business perspective. Yes. this was a realization I came to, I suppose. I did a presentation on benefits management, and it struck me that if the company feels it's doing well and hitting its various different types of targets, I mean, it's probably not hitting every target that it's ever set itself, but at the time I did that presentation, it was doing at the top line, doing well.
But even doing okay.
Sorry?
Even doing okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it was very hard then to have that conversation, to make a justification as to why you should spend a long time on defining your business case properly, obviously the benefits being a key part of it. And another observation from a business point of view, as you quite rightly challenge us to think about, is the senior management would have probably right, I don't want the project at all. In fact, if I could pay more to have a special premium service where I invest in this new thing I want and can skip the project part altogether and next month can have the benefits, then they probably would pay that extra money for that. So they're just actually really not that interested in the project part. It's a necessary evil. And unfortunately, I think in the PMO, we're quite good at making a whole career out of the necessary evil, not really thinking about how to make it painless for the business.
Absolutely. That reminds me when my children were all at school, sitting with the parents through another tortuous children's concert, saying, can we just pay £500 at the beginning of the year to save us sitting through this misery? But to all of you who have young children, enjoy them because they pass so quickly. But yes, I know what you mean. Yes, it was a case of I don't want to know all of the detail, and I want to get involved in doing lots of detail to get something that should come. And I think we have to kind of recognise as well is that I kind of think a bit about mudslinging. They're obviously throwing lots of mud, lots of money at projects, and generally we're doing it okay because the results are coming. The challenges for organisation, by the time they realise they're not doing okay, there's a huge kind of catch-up exercise, and the idea is that while you're doing okay, we can start introducing some of this that starts to highlight when we're not going to be doing okay. We can forecast it and see it coming, and then we can make the recovery much quicker than kind of wait and kind of the bottom falling out of our organisation. So and again, I always challenge people in the PMOs. Yes, it's written into every textbook. Yes, it's best practice. But if your organisation genuinely doesn't perceive themselves to be having a problem, then it becomes a really difficult thing for you to get any traction with and any support from senior management. Why do we have to pay for more process? Why are we making life more difficult for ourselves when actually we're doing okay? And so the interesting thing, and again, one of the things that we've often talked about in terms of key skill for any PMO person, is the ability to ask questions. And, kind of one of the interesting things is where we can start asking questions at a portfolio level that actually they can't answer. And the reason why they can't answer, because they've thrown lots of mud at projects, but they actually don't know which mud's sticking and which mud is making a difference. So really interesting in terms of kind of just asking some of those high level questions in terms of, which of the projects really made a difference last year to the organization. Are there any projects actually we could have done differently, or could have done from a kind of actually just not done at all, and it wouldn't have really had an impact on the business? Or actually, had we been a little bit more focused, not just in the delivery of the projects, we could have had a better result for the organisation. But I do think the real challenge for us is to get out of our project management language or benefits management language and get into organisation language and business language. So some of the biggest blockers that we're seeing from the conference were seen to be so interesting. It's always interesting doing something. Let me just get rid of the annotation. I'm always going to forget to do that. So it's open if you want to start doing some more annotation there. In terms of the biggest blockers, is this lack of funding, but also the lack of buy-in from senior leaders. And I think there's two things here. One is what we've already talked about in terms of, you know, kind of just not wanting to do more project management stuff. There is an element of turkeys voting for Christmas here, because you're essentially going to be asking the senior managers to take on accountability and increase the visibility of their success, because it suddenly becomes very obvious in an organization as to which projects are delivering benefits and not, and actually having the name of the sponsor associated with that project, which is typically going to be one of the senior execs or a senior manager within the organization. So we're asking them really to be quite visible in their support for projects, give them a visible role, and even worse, kind of display their results out in public in terms of whether they've actually delivered the benefits or not. So there is definitely a kind of they're having to sign on to more work for themselves, but visibility in potential failure. And I also, I've found when I've been doing work with sponsors and doing benefits management with organizations, one of the real challenges is here is that there is a surprising number of senior managers who actually just don't know what being a sponsor is all about and just don't know what's involved. And it becomes very difficult if you're a kind of a senior member of an organization, you've got into a position in that organization that is obviously kind of said, this person is successful and is capable of doing good things for the business, to suddenly have to put your hand up and say, actually, I just want to own up to the fact that I don't know how to do this thing. And the number of sponsorship workshops and benefits management workshops, you know, sometimes portfolio management workshops, whatever we want to call them, they're never sold as training courses. They're always taught, you know, my typical terminology is kind of a workshop where we can explore, yes, the role, because then they can all go and kind of contribute, and they're almost kind of doing it on behalf of everybody else because they already know. So interesting in terms of, you know, how you entice them to actually come along to a session where they're going to contribute, but essentially they're learning stuff themselves. And a great example, I was doing a workshop with a European executive team over in Netherlands, and we were sitting there and we talked through the project life cycle, and we talked through the role of sponsor and what everybody was doing, and we get to the end of the project and the project manager gets disbanded and it goes into business as usual. Oh, we need to do benefits realization. And this beautiful Frenchman said very loudly, "Who, me?" And the chief exec kind of turned around, well, yes. And this poor lovely Frenchman hadn't meant to say it out loud, but that was when his penny dropped, that actually as a sponsor he was actually going to have to do something now. Yes, there wasn't a project manager he could go and chase to get things done. And it was just a really interesting of that kind of his sudden realization, because kind of up into that part of the day, you know, yes, he knew about projects, and oh yes, the project manager will be doing this, and yes, I'll be kind of chasing the project manager for reports, and yes, I'll make sure they've got access to my people in the business. And it was this sudden recognition, crumbs, I'm going to have to do something myself. It's me who's going to be held accountable and visible for doing something. And really interesting, somebody's put over there on the right hand side there around, you know, kind of what are the consequences. And so one of the things we often find around this is that we talk about accountability and doing a role that actually makes somebody accountable. The more difficult bit is, what do we do in the organization to hold people accountable? So who are they answerable to, and what are the consequences of that not happening? Now, there was one organization I've done some work with that kind of really did that well, because what they did is said, as a senior manager in the organization, a business as usual senior manager, you've got your operational role description, whether that be logistics manager, warehouse manager, whatever. However, this role will also include you being a sponsor for projects at some point. And therefore, your performance review, your bonus payments are linked not only to how well you work as a senior manager in the organisation, but also in terms of how you perform as a sponsor. So at the end of projects, you'll get some feedback from the project manager and the project team in terms of how well you performed as a sponsor. That was some interesting 360-degree feedback. But also they were also the, you know, kind of from a project perspective, there was very clear accountability for benefits. And if your project, if you had poor performance as a sponsor, you were no longer invited to apply for another senior management position. So regardless of how good you were at doing your senior management role, if you couldn't behave as a sponsor, they said, then you're not the right person to do a senior management role in our organisation. But that was, you know, the huge buy-in from the organisation to just recognise that senior management role and sponsorship roles are now completely intertwined. You can't separate the two. You can't just be good at being a senior manager and running your department, because I say that's about managing today. Whereas if you're starting to talk about being a good sponsor, then actually you're starting to manage for tomorrow for what's coming further on down the line. So as I say, those kind of organisations I think are few and far between and where people want to get to. But we absolutely need this kind of buy-in from the senior leaders to actually be able to kind of make those things accountable. Is there, and I think that this is, so just talk to me kind of chat or kind of out loud in terms of, is there a reason why, other than what we've already talked about, you know, these are the blockers? Or is it back to just a case of understanding and not wanting to vote for Christmas? Anybody asked for some funding and support and just not got it? Nobody's saying. So in terms of the kind of the people who are on the call, are you people who are trying to implement benefits management, trying to improve benefits management, or are you here as the wise and the experienced who've actually kind of been there, seen it, done it, and made it happen?
So I've joined the call just because we're looking at sort of benefits management and trying to get some ideas as to how we can introduce and implement it.
Okay. I'm just curious in terms of kind of whether people have kind of seen this or they're just kind of seeing the problems. Anyway, thank you.
It's Jess again. I'm happy to answer your question from different angle, a different perspective, which is I didn't ask permission. I had program managers and let's call them business leads. They weren't necessarily sponsors, but they've been closely involved as the subject matter expert and were probably going to live with the solution that had been delivered. I had people coming to me in my PMO role saying, I know there's more we can do with this project, but I don't know how to make my manager understand.
Okay.
Or things like, how do I help get my sponsor to understand that by just delivering this phase one, they're not going to get all the benefits they think?
Yep.
So I set about implementing benefits mapping in Carnival UK in order to help people from the ground up influence their management upwards. And so I've approached it from, if you can provide value and clarity within the project itself, then maybe one day, you know, there'll be a realization above. Yeah. So
the other end.
Yeah. So I've tackled it from a completely different perspective. I have to say, when sponsors have attended the sessions that I've run, which obviously doesn't happen all the time, it's I can't guarantee they're going to be there. Sometimes they have said, that is the single best workshop I've ever been to in this company. So I think getting that clarity for people can really help them understand what they need to do. And you can start to change the language of the business, but it requires a huge amount of effort and zeal to do that.
Yeah. And I think as well, you know, it does go back to it's zeal not to do project management for project management's sake. It's about zeal to help the organisation to do what's best for the business.
Totally.
And that has to be seen to be our constant mantra. We're here to help the business succeed. And this is a way where we can have better use of the money that we're spending on projects. I do think that's an important part of that. So just a couple of things in terms of, you know, kind of what people's dream answer is. Some of the things that what they're kind of hoping they're going to be able to achieve comes up. They really want to do some, you know, some benefits, using benefits management or using the benefits in the business case to help project prioritization. So this is an interesting bit in terms of kind of the sequence of events and the things that you need to have in place in order to make kind of benefits management work. But also in terms of once you have benefits management in place, what it then allows you to do. So I'm going back to kind of some of the conversations we had in terms of recognizing what, you know, kind of how to get people on board. If your organization wants to do project prioritization, being able to articulate the benefits in a business case will help them to do that. And as Jess has talked about, actually just being able to articulate the benefits, even if they're in a quantitative way, as well as some of the qualitative ones, by asking the kind of, well, why are we doing the project, is a real start to them actually being able to say, well, actually doing benefits at the beginning of a project is an enabler to project prioritization and actually kind of picking the projects in the first place. So you're not necessarily selling to them the whole benefits management process. Yes. And is this argument we say about, are we better delivering the right projects badly or doing the bad project, the unhelpful projects really well? And, you know, this kind of understanding why we're doing particular projects and good articulation of benefits at the beginning means at least we're doing the right projects. We may not be brilliant at project delivery. We may be rubbish at benefits realization, but at least we're putting our money in the right pots at the very beginning. I love there's a quote by Stephen Covey says, if you're going to climb a ladder, it's always useful to check it's at the right building before you start. And I really kind of feel this in terms of, you know, kind of that kind of starting bit, and it, you know, this kind of, it's got in there in terms of strategic alignment. Neil, you've got a...
Yeah, I was just thinking about a fairly recent experience actually working with a business and their PMO. I'm actually a program manager, but I'm very passionate about PMO because it's essential to a lot of business operations and the way they want to do things. And we had a situation where they tried to prioritize all the projects they had on the books in terms of benefits, and went around the various divisions and departments in the business for their priorities and used a Moscow approach. And you can guess what happened. I mean, everything came back as mandatory.
Of course.
So I just wondered if people, we had to revise the whole approach and come up with a different set of criteria to make it a bit more granular. I'm just wondering if people had similar experiences on other work.
Do you use some kind of multi-criteria analysis, Neil?
We did. We came up with working with the strategy team. We came up, who were responsible for the portfolio largely. We came up with an approach that looked at risk, statutory and regulatory compliance, that kind of thing. I can't remember all the criteria, but we came up with that's the multifaceted approach. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also there's a number of standard. That's more about kind of from a risk rather than why you're doing the project out there. But multi-criteria. Anybody else use multi-criteria analysis for their organisations? Do people know what multi-criteria analysis is?
No.
First. Right then. So let's just be clear about. I'll just kind of stick it in chat, so we're all in case anybody hasn't really got. multi-criteria analysis is a mechanism for scoring projects. Okay, and the idea is that for those projects that get the highest scores, those are the projects that filter to the top and the projects that get undertaken. And organizations define their own scoring mechanisms for projects. Now, at the simplest level, yes, they tend to get points for having benefits. Yes, we're only going to be doing projects who have benefits, and that's where we're in the danger of saying, well, actually financial benefits, and whether we use benefits per se or whether we use net present value or return on investment, it's a nice little numerical number, and we can just compare using that. But what we can get when we get a little bit more sophisticated, that says, well, actually, if it addresses point 1 of our strategy, it gets 10 points. If it addresses point 2 of our strategy, it gets 6 points. And if it addresses part 3 of the strategy, it gets 2 points. So you can talk about the relative importance of the various kind of strategic elements. You can also say, well, actually, you get negative points. So in an organization that drives for consistency, like a large retail organization might, you might get negative marks if you're proposing a project that changes one particular part of the organization and lowers the level of consistency with the rest of the organization. So back to your kind of investments can go up as well as down. You have positive points and negative points. So essentially, some of the things that are not seen to be financial benefits can actually impact the scoring. Now, I think my recommendation here is that if we're going to do multi-criteria analysis, we make it useful but simple, and it has to be consistent. You can't have different methods for kind of every different part of the organization. You have to have a consistent way of actually kind of making that happen. Yeah. So there's interesting bits in terms of kind of using multi-criteria analysis.
That's really, yeah, I'm just reflecting on what we actually did, and it was very similar to that. What you were just talking about then with the negative aspect of the scoring, I think is really interesting. Actually, we didn't do that, and that's a good way to analyze things as well.
Yes. Well, it's interesting, isn't it, in terms of if you talk about projects that are going to create some disruption to the business, yes, that might have a negative impact. You know, that you might want to do, you might not be in a position where for this part of the year, you're not ready for any more business disruption. You know, so there's lots of things you can take into consideration. But if you make it too complex, then actually, you know, people are not going to sign on. And as Jeff said, it only works. You absolutely get senior managers to sign on to kind of what the relative weighting is. And I think the other thing about multi-criteria analysis is recognizing that actually you can put things through the sausage machine and come out with a scoring and say, right, this project, you know, the projects 1, 2, and 3 are score the highest, and senior managers go, yeah, but we want to do 1, 3, and 7. And you've got to have that conversation. Well, actually, you're perfectly entitled to do that. So what is it about project 7 that we didn't score it high enough in the, you know, in the analysis? Is there another criteria that we haven't got in our model, or actually do you just want to do it? But it draws a conversation, and the PMO should never get into a position where we're saying, well, you can't do that because you didn't score enough points, because we'll be battered away. Nothing to do with you. We're here to run the business. So interesting in terms of kind of what people want in terms of their dream outcome. And I think this kind of, as I think it was Elaine who put in there, it's taken 2 years to get to benefits management. If you think this is something you can implement in a couple of months, manage your expectations in terms of there's an education process. You're unlikely to be able to do it in one step, but thinking about kind of how it's an enabler for some of the other kind of business decisions the organization want to do. I had to actually look up what moonshot meant because I didn't know what moonshot meant. And it's about kind of coming up with a single answer, and people just wrote benefits management. So I don't think anybody knows. I think somebody would like to kind of come in the morning and all of a sudden benefits management is implemented, but don't necessarily know what that actually means. But to me, in terms of, and I think Elaine mentioned it as well, and a couple of other people have said, it's actually a cultural change in the organisation that has to be kind of led from above in terms of our understanding about what projects are there for. But it is a real challenge. So I'm conscious of the time. Things that didn't work, just doing role descriptions, saying this is the role of the sponsor, get on and do it. Rushing and actually not doing it properly, just trying to kind of to rush that through, and talking about how we can kind of add value. And I think this is about, kind of, we have to demonstrate. I think it's about what Jess says, it's easier to ask to seek forgiveness than permission. And, there's a philosophical debate about whether that's right, but certainly introduction by stealth, by not taking the whole benefits management end piece to piece, but actually look at elements that you can actually kind of make work that help other aspects, or help sorting your business case out, just even defining the role of the sponsor as they go through the project life cycle, are kind of steps in the right direction. And that's something I say quite frequently now. If you're moving in the right direction, or trying to move yourself in the right direction, that kind of really helps, rather than going for the kind of the moonshot and just saying, this is kind of the end result. So thinking about all of the different elements that are involved in benefits management, and start looking at, well, how can we make progress on all of them? Because the only person who needs to have a joined up picture at this point is us. Yes. As long as the business can see we're doing things, and they might see them as completely disparate things to help improve project delivery and investment, then they'll be happy to support, rather than announce we're going to have a whole program of work led by the PMO to improve benefits management in the organisation. So this is probably, we're getting on, I know hopefully we've done some things. So what people have actually done in their organisation that has helped. Okay, so they came to the conference, which was some, and if we're members of the House PMO, we went to the conference. There is quite a bit in our library around benefits management and the role of the sponsor. So that's there. Let me just, while I remember, to just clear down the annotation. So do feel free to add some other things there if you've tried things that have worked. Actually having some time when we're doing the strategy to prioritize the objectives. So actually kind of being able to align the strategy in terms of what we're trying to achieve. And even then in the projects, trying to say, well, actually, which project fits which bit of the strategy. So, which is at the highest level and understanding of why we're doing the project. So it may not seem a huge step forward, but actually, and there was one organisation I worked with and said, who looked at two different dimensions. It says, is this project going to contribute a little bit, some or a lot to this particular strategic aim? And actually, where was the kind of which aim was it most aligned to? And it just started to get people think, because at a high level they started then having the crudest benefits map in terms of which projects were linked to which strategic aim, and where there was a disproportionate amount of projects that were kind of hanging on to perhaps one of the lower priority objectives of the strategy. A couple of things there in terms of actually just keeping on an eye on benefits through delivery. Now, some of the basic things that might include is typically when we hit a stage gate, we'll ask the project manager, how's the project going? Where are we in terms of budget? Where are we in terms of time and deliverables? Also then saying to the sponsor, can we have an updated view of where the benefits are? And when the sponsor says, well, nothing's changed, you've got to say, well, we've been working on the project for a couple of months now. Surely you've got a better understanding of the likelihood of those benefits coming, a clearer understanding about what business change needs to happen to make those benefits come in. So rather than those stage gates being just at benefits delivery, just at project delivery, having a conversation around actually the overall reason for doing the project in the first place. Are we still on track? You know, the number of organizations where those stage gates are just based at the project manager's perspective, rather than looking at that kind of wider view in terms of project managers and sponsors. Couple of other things that are help is provide a matrix of benefits. So sometimes people don't understand, you know, what can be put in there. And I often talk about having what's called an allowable benefit. So on the basis that your organization, regardless of whether you're public sector, private sector, third sector, whether you're big or small, your organization already has a list of things it measures because it's important to that organization. You know, lowest case scenario, you've got revenue, you've got profit, you might have headcount, you might have contribution to particular elements of if it's a charity, particular elements of streams of work that you sponsor, whatever that is. And having that as a list of benefits and saying, well, actually, which one of these company metrics are you actually going to impact, at least gets people thinking in the right direction. And I would argue we should never be creating a benefits just to report on when we're actually kind of doing our business case. So an interesting, you know, kind of Steve, absolutely, in terms of that recognition that benefits are actually trailed over a number of years. But even that, having that kind of conversation right at the beginning in terms of kind of what investment are we putting in. And there are ways at the end of the project that says, actually, rather than report on individual benefits, what we're going to expect is the line manager is going to have a step change in their operational performance. So rather than saying, I want to report on a 10% increase in customers, and we try and track them back to that particular project, we say, actually, from an operational perspective, you were always tracking between, you know, 3,000 and 3,500 customers. We expect on the basis of this project that your operational figures now track between 3,250 and 3,750. So you can actually embed them into the operational numbers rather than doing kind of standard benefits realization. So that starts to get away from, you know, kind of something kind of 10 miles away, or the sponsors disappeared, because actually it's embedded into an operational rule that will always be there in the organization. And that's not often seen. It's seen, well, actually, you know, we're losing it. Well, actually, I would argue you're still booking the benefits into the business. So that, you know, recognition of what metrics do we currently report, who owns those metrics, and embed them into operational reporting at the end through an uplift or a decrease, rather than seeing them as a separate thing that has to be reported. If I'm really honest, I don't understand what that penultimate bullet point means. So if anybody can help, lessons learned about strategic goals shared with leadership and executive. Anybody want to hazard a guess? But I think there's enough there, and absolutely get a powerful ally. So anybody got any allies? Who would be your ally when trying to drive through benefits management? Who do you think that might be? Because, you know, ideally we want the chief exec who says, you know, the PMO are going to help us with this. So finance business partner. Just a question, Jess. Finance business partner, does that create a greater focus on finance?
Well, I think they start off in that headspace, but I find that the finance business partners are quite good at this sort of critical friend challenge type of conversation.
Okay.
So that it's not just coming from the PMO, so that you really you're into, you know, why should we invest in this project at all type space. And if you can facilitate that discussion at that level, there might be some financial benefits that people are talking about, but very much things like in our space, guest NPS scores and staff ENPS scores are very important as part of our business and are talked about by lots of staff. So those types of things would naturally be in everybody's vocabulary.
Everybody's view.
Yeah.
So just a couple of things. I'm just very conscious of the time. There's a couple of other bits around it again about providing confidence rating on benefits, and again that's part of the, to me that can be part of what gets involved in some of the stage gate reviews. So final slide in terms of what we looked at as some of the barriers. I think what we've talked about, there is bits about data, and I think this is where we're not collecting data at the right thing in terms of how we can measure right at the very start. And I think it's about understanding kind of where we start and looking at, we have to do those kind of front end bits. We can't just suddenly start doing benefits kind of management at the end. This is where that kind of lack of interest, back to the kind of the blocker earlier on, but also kind of the lack of data. And I think we just need to be cognizant of the data and the quality of the data, and the type of data we hold about benefits will finesse over time. So, you know, once we start doing multi-criteria analysis and we're having some information in the business case, might allow us to do more qualitative work, and actually over time you'll get some quantitative things that are more easy to measure. Now, I'm conscious we've kind of rattled through that in a very short space of time. Is there anything specifically that you think the House of PMO can do in terms of you know, other than just kind of just doing this session, that we can do with some of the outputs, some of the things that we could do to help, some templates, some examples, a session on, say, multi-criteria analysis? Is there anything you would like us to do to help you implement benefits management in your organization? What can we do to help? So you can stick it in chat, you can stick it on the board, you can put your hand up, you can write to us after the event. But this is one of the reasons, you know, we're trying to do things that have a practical application in your workspace that really kind of make a difference. Jess, we will absolutely take you up on that. Jess has volunteered to do a session on what it did for hers, and that gets to the kind of the state gate study. It's it. I'm happy to do a session on multi-criteria analysis. I think it's something that's picked up. So there's 2 sessions we can pick up on. So excellent. I hope you found it. It always surprises me how quick these sessions go. Particularly some of the subjects where I know we've kind of all kind of thought about them for quite a long time now. Thank you for kind of coming on. Thank you everybody who's actually kind of shared something today. It's going to lead on to a couple of other sessions that we will do. 2 other boards that we're going to do, and again these are essentially our starter for 10 in terms of this is what we talked about, but potentially kind of highlight some areas we want to talk about. So we're doing the resource management on the 9th of August, as those of you who are listening said, actually now tops benefits management in what organizations find most difficult. And then on the 18th of August we will be talking about working in an organization with low maturity and all of the challenge and opportunities that brings for us in a PMO. Okay, so have I hope you found that useful. Have a great weekend. Congratulations to Lindsay, who's getting married tomorrow.
Oh, well.
So she's going to have a great weekend, and it's going to be sunny, and there's going to be lots of beer and wine and celebrations tomorrow. So if I don't see you before, we shall see you on the 9th of August, hopefully.
Thank you. It was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen.
No problem.
be in touch, Jessica. We'll be in touch.
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually moving on from Carnival soon. I've got a new job at Nats. I don't know if you've got anyone. I don't know if you've got anyone from House of PMO in Nats. I haven't had that conversation with them yet, but I'm going through all the security vetting and everything process at the minute, and I start there on the 12th of October. But
Excellent.
all the stuff I've done at Carnival is really completely my baby. I just want everybody to have the knowledge that I've created, really.
Yeah,
And that was
brilliant.
brilliant to have it. And we always do that. We do have an open invite for people to come and talk, but not everybody's keen
No, absolutely.
to share. So no, it would be
I'd have
really
to go
good.
back and review my slides. I did do a session for a kind of joint session with one of our suppliers that we use. Rupert Taylor at Perform, Pro4 Solutions. So he and I sort of joined up and we did a session, and so there are some slides that I've got that we can, I can evolve on and we can start from. So I know I'm not starting from scratch if I volunteer to do this session. So yeah,
That'd be great.
happy to do that. Obviously,
Absolutely. I mean,
no idea how happy my new boss.
I mean, we've still got.
Sorry, Ali.
Your Wi-Fi is rubbish.
We've still got the. Yeah, I was just going to say we've still got the session that did at Carnival a few years back. Can you remember?
Yeah.
Yes, we did, which they talked about multi-criteria analysis, funnily enough.
Yeah, that's right. That was back in the Kirsty Bennett days.
Okay, well, we'll absolutely be in touch. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem, Lindsay. Have a great day tomorrow.
Thank you.
Cheers, bye.
Brilliant. Thanks,
See you later.
Jessica.